A revised discipline policy was recently adopted for the Boston Public Schools. The policy means a different way to hold students accountable for their behavior, but also more ways to help students when they need support services. Among those working for the policy were the Code of Conduct Advisory Council, the Boston Parents Organizing Network, and the Boston Student Advisory Council. Joining us is a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council, Ayomide Olamuyiwa. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks to be back.
Talk about why there had to be some changes. The policy was changed about 3 years ago, I think. So why have more changes?
We had more changes because around that time, 3 years ago, Boston Student Advisory Council, we decided to take up looking at zero tolerance policy and to look at it as a campaign. And in doing so, when we looked at it, we noticed that there seemed to be a connection with it in terms of push-outs, and how that connected with it was the school-to-prison pipeline. And so we said, how could we prevent that? And the way that we looked at it is that the way that most students are pushed out is because of minor infractions, stuff that could be set aside, forgotten about, or even worked out through a different method. And so the way we could fix that was through revising the Code of Conduct.
Explain how things can build up, because whether it's for something serious or something trivial, if a student gets suspended, you say, well, you missed school one day, you missed school maybe 3 days. So how does this add up to being such a big deal?
It's a big deal because, so suppose a student is suspended for whatever reason, then they're out on the streets and they're doing whatever, and it's a domino effect. So once they're out on the street, they're more likely to do something that might get them into trouble. And once that happens, then they're into the system, into the disciplinary system of the state or wherever it is. And after that happens, the school-to-prison pipeline happens. It's a process and it's a domino effect, and we're trying to prevent that.
Of course, this isn't always just about what can go wrong. This policy is about let's do things differently and maybe do them better. How will the new changes be better?
The new changes will be better because there's more tolerance. The fact that if a student gets in trouble, then we can't immediately suspend them. Now, if a student gets in trouble, then they have to look at a different way to handle the situation before suspension, because it's all about giving the student that second chance, because a second chance can mean everything. Instead of just pushing them out and then putting them on that process, that road to the school-to-prison pipeline.
One of the principles that you're supposed to be trying to use here is restorative justice. So what could that mean?
The restorative justice is basically, we as students, we have certain rights, and provided those rights, then we need to be able to protect ourselves. And when we're feeling that the school system is being unfair to us, then we have those certain rights that we have that are in some ways unalienable.
Well, another thing that you're concerned about is what to do if there's an infraction that involves drug use. I grew up at a time, even when people who were in school with me were using some drugs, that you would just never do anything on school grounds. And I guess if somebody gets caught, you would still expect some pretty serious consequences. Under this new policy, what happens?
Under the new policy, if a student is found with any sort of illegal substance or drug abuse or alcohol, then we take them into some sort of rehabilitation program. And that's the beauty of it. There's so many things. We're kids, we're young, we're the youth, and we need to learn. There's no way that you're gonna walk on this road and not stumble. So we are gonna fall sometimes. This whole new revised code of conduct is gonna help pick us up if we fall. It's not just going to be leaving us behind and then, letting us get trampled and then walk back down into the school-to-prison pipeline. This new code of conduct will help us, and there's just less chance of a student, being left behind.
Of course, the other thing is that when a student does something that is at least fairly serious, you want to see something correct that, not just punish the student. What will be going on here as far as making things better, making things different in terms of a student's behavior?
In terms of students' behavior, at all times, the student will have that sort of privacy, and they'll feel protected. For instance, there's a strict rules against the cell phone policy. If a student's cell phone is taken somehow in class, then that student has the right to have their privacy withheld. The teacher can't look through their phone, go searching into it, or read whatever information is displayed on their phone. they have that privacy, they have that protection, and they have that right.
So people who put that rule in there, I guess they at least believe that some teachers were actually prying into the contents of those phones.
And yes, and it's an invasion of privacy. And so we're trying to prevent against that. And in all things, just trying to uphold the student rights.
Now, and one thing I can't help but notice here, this is distinctly different from what seems to be going on in charter schools. And there are some charter schools with some pretty high numbers for suspensions. They also seem to have some pretty high achievement results as well. So some people might be wondering, well, are suspensions necessarily that bad?
Well, some people might look at it and they say that it's not that bad, but here's how we look at it. The reason for those suspensions are because some students can't keep up with the pace that the charter schools have set for them. And it's the same thing in certain public schools, because if the certain students have the low test scores, which bring down the overall test scores, then the school loses funding. It's all about trying to keep the funding and trying to get more money so they can do more for other students. I know that might sound self-righteous in some ways, but it's not going to help that student, because what are they going to do once they're suspended?
And by the way, you were one of the people working on this new policy. How did that feel that you were getting in there and making this happen in a certain way?
It felt really good, because I've been in the Boston public school system for about 4 years and counting now. And I remember starting off in middle school. A lot of changes happened in my middle school, such as new administrators and new rules, and I always wondered, how did that happen? I never really looked into it until high school, and being involved in the decision making and the changes that are happening, having my input heard and then approved, is just a really good thing.
All right, well, thank you very much for being with us. Ayomide Olumuyiwa from the Boston Student Advisory Council. We'll have more news in just a moment.